field goes automatically to V1, or do we have some other mechanism?
Hey, Carsten, can you repeat the question?
No, I was wondering, do we have a process?
Go ahead.
Do we have a process for adding fields to the V1 API now that is V1? I mean, is it any field automatically becomes V1? Do we have any intermediary stage, or what's the deal?
I believe the intermediary stage will be V1 Alpha 1, and it will progress as its own independent feature stages. To be promoted to V1, it will have to go through the feature graduation process.
But for fields on V1 APIs is your question though, Carsten?
Yes. There is a PR open recently on adding some field on I think destination rule, which is V1, and I was not sure if how it's processed for it.
I think because of Kubernetes.
Can you link that PR?
Go ahead, Whitney.
Sorry?
I was looking for the PR. I don't know if you can share it in the chat.
Oh, give me a minute to get my laptop open.
So Whitney, are you indicating that if, let's say, Carsten wants to add a field in destination rule, and destination rule is already been promoted to V1, that particular field he's adding still needs to go through the graduation process? So it would start with the alpha or even experimental, if it makes sense, and then go through beta and stable. Is that right?
Correct. And right now it will be considered a V1 Alpha 1 field, which will be considered an extended release channel field. And once it's graduated, it will go to the V1 API.
Okay, the PR is the first one oh, sorry. Rama is actually the one who is trying to open it, and if you can add the comments there with the proper process, it will be perfect. I mean, I was just curious what's the status. I'm not the author of the PR.
Okay, sounds good. I assume, Whitney, you're going to take this offline and add the guidance in the PR?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Now, I saw only one thing on the agenda, who's from Ziran, from our release manager. Anything we need to highlight? I assume, given he's not here, maybe if anybody wants to highlight anything, maybe we can provide the feedback directly in the GitHub, unless there's any block we want to discuss for the release.
I think John had a thread in Slack, but off the top of my head, there's, I know, ambient, V1 promotion, Delta XDS, maybe. Good enough to highlight in the release note. Trying to think what else. I might just dig up that message in Slack that John had.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah. Do we have any other topic for today?
Just a small one. I have a PR up to update to the latest release candidate for Gateway API. So if people want to take a look at that, that would probably be good to get in the release. I think that's the last open PR that we really want in the release. So I can find a link to it, or you can search. It's not trivial because they added a new conformance test that we failed. So it's not just bumping the version. Technically, we could bump the version and skip the test. I have to not to do that, but if there's demand, we can go down that route.
Is the RC2 PR?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. Cool. I'll take a look on at it. The only thing other thing I had was, are we good on other docs? I know there's Craig's got that spreadsheet. Where do we need help on any of the docs?
I can give a quick update. I think we have usage guide for cTunnel updated. Craig did most of the work, and then I think we just created our layer 7 usage guide. I think Craig is maybe help restructure things, but at least the guide is there. We also have our install update guide. I think for ambient, basic doc is there. Certainly there are additional doc would be nice. Like how do we do authorization policy, navigate the complexity of authorization policy. I think it's probably worth documenting. And also this intern Fasila and I are working with, we're working on adding WASM plugin resource, how to use that with waypoint. So that would be very nice to have. And I think Jeremy, I think it was Whitney, right? You wrote a blog for the release channel, so that's good. And I'm writing the ambient announcement blog, reuse some of the contents we have for CNCF last time. I think Craig said he's going to write the release blog. So do we feel anything major that's missing? Okay, Costa, I saw your question. Yeah, WASM is, I believe it's marked as alpha. So it's alpha in ambient. By the way, it's in the release in the layer 7 guide for ambient. Go ahead, Costa.
You ask if anything is missing. My question is opposite. Do we have too much? So do we want to, how do we tell users that alpha stuff should not probably be used in production, or not repeat the mistakes we did with Istio, where we gave the impression that alpha features are usable in production? WASM is an example. I mean, if it's included in the docs, I mean, it's. Do we believe it's clear for users from the documentation that they should not use it in production, or?
For alpha, yes, because we have multiple places. It says, I mean, we have our future status page that says alpha is not recommended in production, right? So if they were willing to try it, they'd be on their own.
But we still enable all the alpha features when we, so by default, when you install, you still have all those alpha feature. It's not trivial for an administrator to, kind of prevent users from doing it. It relies, and you know how users are just cut and pasting from other places. So like in Istio, I mean, yes, we have pages, and if someone reads them and pay attention to them, it's one thing. But my concern is basically that we are also launching with alpha features enabled by default, and anyone cut and pasting from Stack Overflow or ChatGPT will probably start using them without knowing, and they will not. I don't think ChatGPT gives you the warnings that you should not use it.
So that's one of the pieces of release channels, right? Is that in 122, if you're using Kubernetes 1.30, an administrator can deploy a valid ignition policy that will block use of WASM plugin in the entire cluster.
Is this something we do by default, or I mean, is it something we, and for ambient in particular, is it something that it's done in the, if you follow the user guide, you get it, or you need to read extras and do the extra stuff?
So as far as being installed by default, that's something that we can it's difficult because existing automation and existing mods and plugins, there's nothing preventing it now, so it's really hard to enable it by default. But if you want to, if a user decides to install the stable profile, they will get the logging admission policy. And so this is something that's a part of Whitney's blog. And so risk averse users who and admins who want to ensure that their application developers, whoever else, are only using a stable feature set of Istio can deploy this policy, and it will block non-stable usage.
Okay, that's perfect. And this is also for ambient is the same thing. I mean, there's some stable ambient channel. I'm not sure I fully understand how the stable applies to ambient and how ambient will because ambient is clearly marked for new users, so there is no concern about migration. Anyway, I was just curious.
Yeah, it's so this is for APIs. So any non-stable APIs will get blocked. As far as ambient goes, mesh administrators also have the ability, if they want to disable ambient, there are various flags I think John added or maybe Ben added in the control plane to prevent the ambient control. You can turn off the ambient controller. You can turn off HBone and the environment variables. So for mesh admins, like there is a way to disable it for people who are risk averse, and I think that's kind of getting at the heart of what you're looking for to be able to prevent foot guns for risk averse users. Oh, okay. New user installing ambient. It depends. It's not, the policy is not deployed by default when you're installing ambient. There is a whole 100-message thread in Slack about ambient mode versus the ambient data plane, and it's complicated to bifurcate those very neatly. But for people who do want to prevent that from happening, there is a way to accomplish that. I think that's the important thing, and we should educate users about the tools that they have available. Changing defaults is really hard and can easily break people, but the fact that we've got the ability to prevent it is something that we should let users know about.
Yeah, definitely agree. I mean, especially considering that's also experimental and alpha, if I remember correctly. I don't see us turning on by default for now until it's also recommended for production. Does it also require a newer version of Kubernetes too, Keith and Whitney?
It does. So it does require Kubernetes 1.30 because the feature that we're using is only on by default, and that API version only exists in Kubernetes 1.30. So it kind of it gets easier as time moves on.
Yeah.
If we see this outpouring of user support and people want to leverage it on older versions, we can potentially consider building it into the revision of the control plane. It does get a bit hard as far as versioning goes. We can explore extending it via webhook in the future if we find that demand for it. But like I said, it is a problem that goes away in a year or two. So it would have to be in my mind, it have to be a somewhat substantial group of users want to get on older versions.
Yeah, I agree. It's not probably something that we need to, force it too much. I just want to see if we can get some new users that are just brand new installing ambient or Istio to have it by default wherever possible. And in particular, I was concerned about the documentation, to be very clear in the documentation that please enable this and with a link to the documentation, because I'm not sure exactly how it is. I mean, I haven't seen a clear documentation, and also with clear warning on each alpha feature that if you enable this feature, it will not work. And also you should not use it even if the feature is not enabled. So it's kind of, I don't feel the documentation are strong enough about discouraging people and explaining that if you enable this feature and what the interactions between, if you enable strict validation and the release channels, that some features that are documented will not work and so forth.
I think
Yeah,
this is the
I
area you can probably step in to help costing, because you have specific requirements. I mentioned a lot of docs are in progress. It definitely needs a lot of reviews and PRs, so definitely welcome. Sorry, Keith.
Okay. I can take
I was
a
gonna say the
look
same
at
thing.
and try to suggest.
Yeah, like I think that your call outs are very appropriate, Costin. I mean, I think that we do want to have a clear path through docs. There are a lot of documentation efforts now that are starting up conversations in Slack. I know that's some focus Craig and myself are wanting to do in 123. So we'd love to have you contribute because I think there's a lot of work to be done here.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to send PRs. I was just trying to figure out what is the kind of approach or what is intended state. I mean, do we have some way to place a disclaimer, or what's kind of the proper way to do it? I mean, it's just go in each document and add some comments, or Envoy, for example, has some clear warnings on most documentation. I mean, can we copy what Envoy is doing? I don't want to start writing docs.
Yeah, we've got like red, not flash notifications, but we've got red boxes that you can put in places to say, hey, this is like on Istio operator, the in-cluster operator. We've got warnings there to say, hey, this is. I think the term is discouraged, and we don't encourage you to use this. We should absolutely for guides and such where we're showing people how to use experimental alpha features. We should have similar warnings on those pages. I think we can absolutely be stronger there.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. And if you send me the docs and I figure out how to run to install ambient with this release channel, I may try to put an extra thing on the how to install to. I mean, would be desirable to have this in documentation. I mean, install ambient with the validation enabled so people use it safely. Okay.
I think I'm somewhat cautious about that simply because the validated admission policy is for all of Istio, and I'm actually worried about kind of the reverse to where people think, oh, if it's allowed by the admission policy, it works in ambient, which is not necessarily true. Like, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think what's a good example? Workload.
Virtual service.
Yeah, virtual service. Thank you. That's a great example. Yeah, virtual service is a stable API. It's V1. It definitely passes the policy. But I think John had that doc of beta quality scope for ambient. Virtual service and the Istio APIs aren't allowed, or rather aren't beta quality for ambient. They're still alpha. And so I don't want to kind of encourage the negative or present the opposite assurance that if it passes the policy, then it's safe for ambient, because it's not.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning virtual service. I was playing exactly with this, trying to get a version of virtual service that can be used safely for migration. So yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, I think we should probably add for some validation for virtual service as well. I mean, it's the intent, not necessarily the status that we have.
All right, should we wrap this up and get to work?
Sounds good to me. Thanks, folks.
Yeah, see you guys soon. Bye.
Bye.